I'd like to start out by expressing my gratitude to my parents who brought me into this human form, who loved me and then set me free to the great outdoors. And then the Fourfold Sangha, all of you. I'm very grateful to each of you, and especially to Reverend Master Mayon for the privilege for training here. I'm grateful to the President of the United States and the Buddhas and ancestors. And deep bows of gratitude to Reverend Master Daishin, my teacher. And of course, excuse me, I'm just a little nervous. And to Zadie, she's another good teacher. Thank you. Okay, let's get started. We're going to start with a simple story, and it's brimming with an amazing amount of compassion. There was a man in a village. He was very poor, but even kings were jealous of him because he had a beautiful white horse. Such a horse had never been seen before. The beauty, the intelligence, the very grandeur, the strength. Kings asked for the horse, and they offered fabulous prices. But the man would say, "This horse is not a horse to me. He is a person. How can you sell a person? He is my friend. He is not a possession. How can you sell a friend?" The man was poor. There was every temptation, but he never sold the horse. One day in late summer, many years later, the now old farmer was working in his field with his old sick horse. The farmer felt compassion for his friend and desired to lift his burden. So he let his friend, the beautiful white horse, loose to the green pastures of the mountains where he could live out the rest of his life. Soon after, neighbors from the nearby village visited, offering their condolences, and said, "What a shame. Now your only horse is gone. How unfortunate you are. You must be very sad. How will you live? Work the land and prosper?" The farmer replied, "Who knows? We shall see." 2 days later, the old horse came back, now rejuvenated after meandering on the mountainsides while eating the wild grasses. Excuse me. He came back with 12 younger and healthier horses, which followed the old horse right into the corral. So word got out in the village that the old farmer's good fortune, and it wasn't long before the people stopped by to congratulate the farmer on his good luck. "How fortunate you are," they exclaimed. "You must be very happy." Again, the farmer softly said, "Who knows? We shall see." At daybreak the next morning, the farmer's only son set off to attempt to train the new wild horses. But the farmer's son was thrown to the ground and broke his leg. One by one, the villagers arrived during the day to bemoan the farmer's latest misfortune. "Oh, what a tragedy. Your son won't be able to help you farm with a broken leg. You'll have to do all the work yourself. How will you survive?" "You must be very sad," they said. Calmly, going about his usual business, the farmer answered, "Who knows? We will see." Several days later, a war broke out. The emperor's men arrived in the village, demanding the young men to come with them to be conscripted into the emperor's army. As it happened, the farmer's son was deemed unfit because of his broken leg. "What very good fortune you have," the villagers exclaimed, as their own young sons were marched away. "You must be very happy." "Who knows? "We shall see," replied the old farmer as he headed off to work his field alone. As time went on, the broken leg healed, and the son was left with a slight limp. Again, the neighbors came to pay their condolences. "Oh, what bad luck. Too bad for you." But the old farmer simply replied, "Who knows? We shall see." As it turned out, all the other young village men had died in the war, and the old farmer and his son were the only able-bodied men capable of working the village lands. The old farmer became wealthy and was very generous to the villagers. They said, "Oh, how fortunate we are. You must be very happy." To which the old farmer replied, "Who knows? We shall see." So I really love this story. Perhaps it's because I'm a third-generation farmer, or maybe even more than that, on both sides of my family. And as a young farmer myself, I was part of a herd of horses. We had 2 beautiful white horses, a grandmother and a mother. And the mother had 2 babies. They were all full of Arabs. And then we had 1 Shetland pony that I rescued from the glue factory. So we were quite a bunch. And the 6 of us, and sometimes my brother, would, whenever we could, would go to the forest over the hill from the barn and just, go play and hang out with one another. So I can really relate to this horse and this farmer. So it brings me a sense of contentment to actually imagine what their beautiful relationship was like. The exquisite kindness and compassion and the effort and the exchange between the 2 of them day after day, all the days of their lives together. And I believe this story takes place in China. And it must have been part of the culture of the day to visit or drop by your neighbors frequently. The old farmer didn't seem to be surprised when the villagers showed up, nor did he judge them by what they had to say, respond to them using harsh speech. Over and over again, the old farmer just went about his usual business, returning to the field to work, regardless of the conditions. Not only was the farmer kind to the beautiful white horse, he was also compassionate to humans. The farmer and his son had the opportunity to be relentlessly blown about by the 8 worldly winds. As you know, or you may know, the 8 worldly winds are gain and loss, pleasure and pain, praise and blame, fame and disgrace. The old farmer was not upset or pressured by the conditions and events of the day. The winds blew, and he was not attached to an outcome. War touches all the lives of the villagers in this story in one way or another, touched by the death of a loved one and the scars that the conditions of war can create. The old farmer responds with generosity and kindness. We too are all too familiar with the consequences of war, the sheer mental brutality for some, the loss of a brother, a mother, a sister, a friend, a lover. So how do we respond? I will be so bold to say that this farmer had a spiritual way of thinking that produced the activity of both compassion and love. From my experience, old farmers have a keen understanding of the cycles of nature and realize that their time is not well spent on trying to control them. Good, bad, fortunate, unfortunate. There's no point to overly investing in the future we cannot control without considering the whole situation. The farmers seem to have clear insight into events being part of a larger whole, that the meaning and the nature of the event is only relative to the changing circumstances and conditions surrounding them. Great Master Dogen once said, "Even the power of Buddha is just a part of the whole, like a blooming flower as one event of spring." The old farmer was able to take into the consideration the bigger picture, the thousands upon thousands of individual moments each making sense and carrying meaning for our life. Yet the whole of our existence we truly cannot make sense of until the last sequence, the very last moment. For who knows what will happen next at any given moment? For me, this very fact encourages us to train diligently, as laid out by the Buddha, with compassion and faith, trust and wisdom. The origin of the story may be Buddhist or Taoist or maybe something else. To me, that part really doesn't matter. This simple story contains wonderful Buddhist guidelines on how to live our daily life. And I think the inspiration to respond unconditionally and to develop our own mind's attitude to time will help us to not be attached to an outcome, to be compassionate to all, including ourselves. As we know, Buddhism is not about being the perfect human or escaping the natural results of one's deeds, one's karma, but of seeing what is actually taking place now, no matter what it is. I'm grateful beyond words to have finally connected with compassion. Compassion has always been with me, and it seems for a very long period of time I was not willing to give myself permission to accept such a gift. Over 20 years ago, right over in the Kanzeon Shrine, in the pre-dawn ceremony, I was a layperson experiencing a really difficult period in my life. And I knew I was ready for a change. And I didn't know where to find it or how to look, so I really wasn't doing anything. While listening to the words of the scripture of Avalokiteshvara, I distinctly remember feeling very unworthy and ashamed and embarrassed of some of the choices I've made in the past. I then began to cry a flood of tears, first of sadness, and then sometime later, joy. There are no words to express how my whole being felt after being touched by such gentle compassion that day. But the closest I can get is the message I got that the past is just a memory, to let it go. And at that moment, I was deeply present. And even to this day, I sometimes wonder what I was thinking when I make a choice. You know, I obviously wasn't thinking at all, if you look at some of the results, but there you go. But now the eyes and the hands and the heart of compassion come to my aid. And it's just like shooting an arrow into the ground. You can't miss when you call upon compassion. So I'd like to close with one more story. It's one of my favorites. Asanga was one of the most famous Indian Buddhist saints and lived in the 4th century. He went to the mountains to do a solitary retreat, concentrating all his meditation practice on Buddha Maitreya, loving kindness, in the fervent hope that he would be blessed with a vision of the Buddha and receive teachings from him. For 6 years, Asanga meditated in extreme hardship, but did not even have one auspicious dream. He was disheartened and thought he would never succeed to his aspiration to meet the Buddha Maitreya. And so he abandoned his retreat and left the hermitage. He had not gone far down the road when he saw a man rubbing an enormous iron bar with a strip of silk. Asanga went up to him and asked him what he was doing. "I haven't got a needle," the man replied, "so I'm going to make one out of the iron bar." Asanga stared at him, astounded. Even if the man were able to manage it in 100 years, he thought, what would be the point? He said to himself, "Look at the trouble people give themselves over things that are totally absurd. You are doing something really valuable, a spiritual practice, and you're not nearly so dedicated." So he turned around and went back to his retreat. Another 3 years went by, still without the slightest sign from the Buddha Maitreya. "Now I know for certain," he thought, "I'm never going to succeed." So he left again and soon came to a bend in the road where there was a huge rock, so tall it seemed to touch the sky. At the foot of the rock was a man busily rubbing it with a feather soaked in water. "What are you doing?" Asanga asked. "This rock is so big it's stopping the sun from shining on my house, so I'm trying to get rid of it." Asanga was amazed at the man's indefatigable energy and ashamed of his own lack of dedication. He returned to his retreat. 3 more years passed, and still he had not even had a single good dream. He decided once and for all that it was hopeless, and he left his retreat for good. The day wore on, and in the afternoon, he came across a dog lying on the side of the road. It only had its front legs, and the whole of the lower part of its body was rotting and covered with maggots. And despite its pitiful condition, the dog was snapping at those who passed by and pathetically trying to bite them by dragging itself along the ground with its 2 good legs. Asanga was overwhelmed with vivid and unbearable feeling of compassion. He cut a piece of his own flesh He cut a piece of flesh off his own body and gave it to the dog. Gave it to the dog to eat. Then he bent down to take off the maggots that were consuming the dog's body. But he suddenly thought he might hurt the maggots if he tried to pull them off with his fingers, and then realized that the only way to remove them would be on his tongue. Asanga knelt down to the ground and looked at the horrible, festering, wreathing mass, closed his eyes, and he leaned closer to put out his tongue. The next thing he knew, his tongue was touching the ground. He opened his eyes and looked up. The dog was gone. There in its place was the Buddha Maitreya, ringed by a shimmering aura of light. Asanga at last understood the boundless power of compassion that had purified and transformed his karma.